Matthew, and this video session is going to go over the residential sales contract, and it's a contract that is in place as of July 2018. So, every 6 months or so, NVAR releases a new standard form. So if it has, that form is dated at the bottom, and you can see down here, it tells you when the last time it was dated. If it was dated after that date, then you'll want to check and make sure that you know whatever differences there are, keep up to date on those forms. Changes that come out again every July and January. So we're going to start off with this pretty basic residential sales contract in Virginia. This is the NVAR library. There are other libraries out there, including the Virginia Association library that is in your zip forms. Do not mix the two library forms together. They do not coincide, and they will call for certain things and have specific language that may be run contradictory to one another if you try to mix them up. So do not do that. This form, we're only going to cover in this video the core contract, so buckle up. It does take a few minutes longer than the other addendums and forms, and I will reference things like the finance contingency and home inspection contingency that will be in other videos, so you'll need to go search for those. I'm not going to necessarily do them in any given order other than the one that's most predictable for a transaction. So when we're going through the core contract now, we're going to start off here with the day's date. This is the date of the offer, not the contract, so it does get completed. The buyer's name, the seller's name. And then this is agreement. This paragraph is establishing that this is a contract between the two parties. Remembering that we adopted in 1677 the statute of frauds that says, okay, real estate contracts must be in writing to be enforceable. That means the court won't hear any agreement other than what's in writing in between the parties. It must have a clear meeting of the minds, which means that anybody who's looking at this, a third party who's looking at this, for example, would be able to say this was the intent of the two parties. So anywhere that you see stuff like to be determined or it's blank, causes one to think that maybe we didn't have a clear meeting of the mind. If there's contradictory statements or unanswered questions in the contract, like you say, yes, I want the home inspection, but you don't add the addendum, all of those could be a defense from a good attorney for whether or not you even had a meeting of the minds. And their effort will be to get a document thrown out of court if it's not clear. Also under Article 9 of the Realtor Code of Ethics, you're obligated to render all agreements to the parties in writing, and everyone needs to sign and receive copies as quickly as possible. If you're using zip form and DocuSign, they get copies once they're signed. You should add them to your DTR transaction room so they get copies. All of that stuff will help you be in compliance with this. So this agreement is pretty serious agreement. There are damages to be had, there are conflicts that could arise, and so you and I can do our best work by ensuring that we have clear and understandable contracts. Even though it's 2018, there are still, for reasons unknown, people who use fax machine and in very low-end scanners. And so if you have someone who is printing it out and writing it and scanning it or faxing it if they can find a fax machine, it will deteriorate the quality of the document, which means you start getting this muddy looking language and words that aren't clear and terms that aren't forthright and off-kilter scans and all the rest. It is argued that you probably don't have a ratified contract if, again, it's not clear to someone who's not familiar with the form and who's looking from the outside in. So when you get to the point where you're the other party, and hopefully none of you are doing this, but the other party is using fax machines or printing out and scanning and all that, you may, at the end of the negotiations, need to re-render or redraft a complete and clean agreement to ensure you have, again, the meeting of the minds. The contract is foundational on good faith. And so we answer a lot of questions about what was expected of the parties through the written agreements. Did they act in good faith? Did they perform to the level they were supposed to? And so that's what this agreement is. It is more than just fill in the blanks. During this course and during this video series, I'm going to give you some pretty typical or standard elements of what you should enter into an agreement. But the reason those lines are blank is that they're dynamic. That means the transaction itself will dictate specific things in there. There are no standard entries. If it is standard, then it would have been pre-printed. So for example, home inspection. Don't simply put 10 days because everybody else does. Count the dates out, and we'll talk about that more in the home inspection contingency, to make sure it's doable and complete, that you give time for the parties to reach an agreement and do repairs in a timely manner. So again, this agreement it's a serious agreement. Ambiguities in the offer are usually held against the drafter. So if you're typing this up and you leave things unchecked or unclear, you may be actually creating problems for you and your client later. So be specific, be clear, and use plain language. With that said, we're going to go through now. This first paragraph is establishing who's representing who and who's liable for who. So the buyer and seller have elected their agents. In this case, Coldwell Banker Elite is representing the seller. ABC Realty Group is representing the buyer. And so we check the buyer. This buyer checkbox references the second entry. It's clear for the listing company who we represent, so we then add the second entry. The listing broker, I'm not going to read everything in every agreement to you, but this is establishing that they're acting as agents, and if it is dual agency, if this was Coldwell Banker Elite and this was Coldwell Banker Elite, it is dual agent. It may be designated in that you and another agent within the firm are working that transaction, but it's dual for Kevin, the owner of the firm, and the principal broker. So make sure you have the right addendums attached. And again, we'll cover the dual and designated agency forms in different video series. And then the real property. In 2006, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled that in this particular case, a contract may not be ratified if you have not put in the proper real property tax record information, including and specifically the legal description. A mere 911 or routing address is not good enough. It needs to be clear real property language and the legal description. You can get that out of tax records. And if you reference one of my other videos, RPR lets you just import it on over so you don't risk screwing it up. Under paragraph 2, the price and financing clause, you notice that the forms committee has given you two options here. So we're going to assume that our contract is $450,000. Okay, that's our sales contract. That's the offer price, rather. The down payment of which is perhaps 20%. So I like using percentages versus the actual numbers because I don't want to have to do math, to be honest with you. And so we'll say that 80% is going to be in the first trust, and then that makes this NA. And if you're using zip forms, you can hit the space bar and it'll let you type whatever you want in. Otherwise, it's going to demand that you use numbers because those are number fields. And again, do not leave anything blank. So put NA in there or a line through it or whatever you wish. So the total financing is then going to be 80%. All right? Excuse me. So that's going to say 80% is going to be financed, 20% is going to be down for a total sales price of $450,000. If you were doing cash, you would put for the down payment 100%. You would not put anything in financing, and then you would come down here and make sure the appropriate box was checked. So the first trust is going to be obtained, and it's not going to be assumed. Assumed is typically going to be only for your VA loan, people who possess a VA loan who can then assume it or transfer it over. We're going to make this a fixed rate or adjustable. These terms are not just random things we're putting in there. What you're establishing for the buyer is that they're going to apply for a very specific loan. They are going to apply to obtain a fixed rate mortgage amortized over 30 years and not to exceed an interest rate of 4.5%. Be reasonable in that number. It is going to be conventional. These are very important elements. A lot of agents just gloss over or leave blank because what you're doing is building a defense for the buyer who says, I have in good faith applied for a fixed 30-year mortgage at 4.5% interest rate. And when the lender comes back and says, you don't qualify, we can't do fixed, we can only do adjustable, or your interest rate is going to be 6%, then the buyer has the ability to say, we hereby terminate because we cannot achieve what we stated was reasonable in the contract. If you're the listing agent, you want to look over these numbers and make sure those are reasonable. If they're putting 2.1%, it's not reasonable, and they may have put an area in there for them to be able to get out later, which none of us want. It is always our job as agents to assist our clients entering into the contract. It is an attorney's job to assist them out. So if you do get to a conflict here as a listing agent, don't start pointing to it and go, you put this number, or the buyer agent, I'm getting my buyers out because I put 2.5%. Your buyers, if they wish to terminate, should always be referred to an attorney to make sure they have a clear right to do so. Because there is a question of whether or not they had the right intention when they entered into a contract. If you, the buyer agent, entered an incredibly low interest rate, for example, did you intentionally do that to try to jeopardize the agreement. Was it in good faith that they entered it? Okay. And if it's cash, we would just check this is not contingent on financing. In this case, ours is contingent on an 80% loan, and they need to obtain it. It needs to be fixed rate, and it needs to be over 30 years at no more than 4.5%. And so those elements tell you exactly what the buyer needs to apply for. They're not getting a second interest rate. So I, again, not liking ambiguities in the contract, I'm going to highlight this paragraph. I'm going to go up here to the strikeout button and strike out as much of this as I can. All right, and so that there's no question about it. Okay, and really all you need to do is strike out that first bold line that establishes what the paragraph is, but I'm going a little overboard here. All right, and we're not assuming a loan, so we're going to highlight that section and do strikeout button and then get rid of that.